Welcome to Chapter 14. In this chapter, we're going to talk about organizational strategy and the 5 strategic forces that influence strategy formulation within organizations. The 5 strategic forces that we'll discuss in this chapter, as well as Chapter 15, are the environment, the technology available within the organizational context, the organization's strategy or strategic plan, the organization's culture, and the organizational structure. If you look at this slide, you'll note that all of the arrows are double-sided. This is because all of these variables are interdependent and may influence each other. The starting point of the strategic forces is the organization's vision. The organization's vision is its purpose, its reason for existing, and it is the foundation for any organizational strategy. So we'll begin our discussion by looking at the organizational environment more in depth. The organizational environment is made up of all of the external factors that have the potential to impact the organization. Those include the business environment and the general environment. So we'll look at some of those variables together. Within the business environment, the organization might be impacted by the state of the economy. For example, how much disposable income individuals have, or the financial markets, how easy it is for the organization to borrow money, to grow, or to develop its objectives. Technological advancements are another variable that might influence organizations and represent new opportunities for growth or increased efficiency. Government regulations might impact organizations. For example, new legislation might require organizations to adapt. For example, when the ADA was passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act, many organizations were required to adjust their facilities to accommodate people with disabilities. Of course, organizations also have to pay attention to competitors, and those might be domestic or global. Organizations have to pay attention to the human resources and the availability of the labor market. Does the organization have sufficient talent in the pipeline to meet its needs? Organizations, of course, must also pay attention to suppliers and the customers. These are all of the variables in the business environment that might influence any organization and might need to be taken into consideration when making decisions regarding the organization's future. The general environment includes additional variables that might have a direct or indirect impact on the business environment. Social trends, for example. Social trends can influence consumer tastes. For example, a current social trend is consumers' desire to be better informed about the sustainable practices of the organization. They want to know where organizations source their ingredients, how organizations treat their employees, what organizations do to protect the environment. And so this is a social trend that might influence customer preferences and might have implications for how organizations do business. The global business environment, which is going to impact both the economy, financial markets, as well as competitors. The business world is becoming increasingly global. Organizations are more and more likely to compete with organizations within as well as outside of their domestic markets. The political climate can have an impact on government regulations or the possibility of organizations to expand into foreign markets, for example. Demographic trends. Think about a very important current demographic trend, the aging population. What does that mean for employees? It might mean that employers want to retain their employees longer and delay retirement because of the aging population. Employees live longer, live healthier, and might want to continue working into their later years. This might also represent opportunities for organizations serving this demographic, which has disposable income and available time. So these demographic trends might have implications for organizations in terms of their customer base and even their labor market. The national culture or societal culture in which the organization operates, as well as the regional culture, might also matter. It's important to understand that, especially in large countries like the United States, regions might have different cultures or differences across their cultures. Maybe not to the same extent as societal cultural differences, but still significant enough that organizations cannot ignore them. And so the important aspect about the environment, both the business environment and the general environment, is that it is up to the organization's leadership to sense the environment, to pay attention to what's happening in the organizational environment and determine what is relevant. Once leaders determine environmental changes and decide what is relevant for their organizations and what isn't, they can then enact their environment. Enacting the environment means what developments, changes, external pressures demand attention so that the organization can successfully meet its mission and vision. To give you an example, the airline industry will have to pay attention to many variables in its environment. For example, aircraft and part suppliers will impact the airline's ability to operate at a high level. Of course, airlines also have to pay attention to labor unions. The airline industry is heavily unionized, both pilots as well as flight attendants and other employees, and so organizations in that industry cannot ignore labor unions and their power. Airlines must pay attention to competitors. For example, the emergence of many low-cost carriers has put competitive pressure on many of the full-service airlines. Airlines have to pay attention to regulatory agencies and new legislation, and of course, fuel suppliers and costs of fuel. All of those are contextual variables that make the environment in which airlines operate very complex. It is essential that organizations pay attention to their environment, sense it, and enact it correctly. If organizations fail to note changes in the environment that are relevant to them, they might suffer some performance consequences. For example, the US automakers suffered in the 70s and 80s because they failed to pay attention and enact the changes in what consumers wanted. Gas prices were rising. Japanese competitors were entering the market with smaller, cheaper, more gas-efficient cars, and American auto manufacturers did not detect these changes early enough to respond and prevent some of the financial losses that they encountered. Enacting the environment is not as simple as it sounds because organizational environments are so complex and so uncertain. It is very often difficult for organizations to sense changes early enough and respond quickly enough. And this becomes increasingly difficult when organizations operate in very uncertain environments. So how do we assess the uncertainty of the organizational environment? We look at two variables: the number of elements that change, that creates complexity, and the rate of change. Do those elements change slowly or rapidly? In organizations that operate in industries that have a low rate of change and low complexity, few elements are changing, exist in relatively stable and simple environments. Of course, no environment will be completely stable, but some environments will be more stable than others. And so organizations that operate in a stable and simple environment will face relatively low levels of uncertainty. There are a small number of changes, low complexity, that change slowly. For example, the packaging industry. We still use cardboard, bubble wrap, the same basic materials for packaging as we have a long time ago. But of course, there is some change, but the change is happening slowly. Organizations are trying to come up with more sustainable packaging that is biodegradable, but these changes are happening slowly as scientific developments occur. And so this industry faces a relatively low uncertainty environment. Other industries might face highly complex environments in which many elements change, but they do so fairly slowly. This also creates a relatively low to moderate uncertainty environment, where many external factors change, high complexity, but they do so slowly. An example of this, such an industry might be trucking or refrigeration, in which the number of elements that change can be quite large, but the change happens very slowly. A different type of environment that also benefits from moderate to low uncertainty is one in which few elements are changing, but they do so at a very high pace. And so, small number of external factors that are changing, low complexity, but high pace. A good example of this industry is the fashion industry or the toy industry, right? The things that we wear remain constant: pants, shirts, dresses, shoes, but the styling, the coloring, the materials might change quite rapidly. The same goes for the toy industry. Children still play with fairly similar toys as they did a couple of decades ago, but the fashions change, right? We still use stuffed animals, but what they are changes rapidly. We still use figurines, but what they are changes rapidly. So these two industries, stable and complex, or high change and simple, both represent moderate to low uncertainty. The most complex environment to operate in is one that has high rate of change, that the changes happen very rapidly, and high complexity. Many elements are changing. So a large number of external factors that change very quickly. This environment represents high uncertainty. Organizations or industries that fall into this category would be technology or the airline industry, that have to deal with many factors that change and change at a very high pace. And the organizational environment can become even more complex when there is high interdependence among the elements that change, right? For example, this interdependence adds complexity when manufacturers, for example, like Procter & Gamble, decide what to produce and what to sell based on Walmart's decisions. And so these types of interdependencies can even add complexity to the already existing environmental complexity that organizations are coping with. So we discussed the environment as one of the 5 strategic forces, and now we're going to shift gears and discuss technology. Technology is one of the environmental variables that tends to change quite rapidly. We live in a time where technology is constantly being enhanced, improved, and changed. And so the technological advancements can represent some significant benefits for organizations. One way in which changing technologies benefit organizations is that they can increase efficiency and productivity. Organizations can boost efficiency by, for example, when humans are replaced with machines. Machines don't get tired, machines don't make mistakes. And so this can enhance efficiency, reduce error, and as a result, also reduce cost and boost productivity. The technology can also enable us to communicate. We've already discussed this when we discussed our chapter on communication and on teams. Organizations can now benefit from having access to experts regardless of their physical location, thanks to information technology that enables us to communicate seamlessly regardless of our physical location. Of course, technologies also represent opportunities for organizations when organizations can go after new markets. Think about Appalachian State University and its ability to offer a distance education degree to non-traditional students, working individuals who already have jobs and don't have the ability to commute to campus, but can take distance education classes in the evening or at night electronically via electronic education, much like we are doing now for summer classes or for other reasons. And so the technology can boost efficiency, reduce cost, reduce error, enable us to communicate seamlessly across borders, and also enable us to pursue new markets. Of course, new technologies can benefit manufacturing, but also service industry. The new technologies are not limited to manufacturing or the tech areas, but also to the service industry. More and more service organizations are employing technology. Think about checking into your hotel or checking into your flight or placing a food order. Many of those processes are now simplified by using electronic platforms. New technologies can be bought from the outside and can also be developed in-house. And of course, many technologies are also used to enable organizations to become more sustainable. These are referred to as green technologies. I included a video on you As You Learn page, which is called The Secret Life of Eggs. And it's an example of how Walmart collaborates with others to use technology to become more sustainable and reduce waste in their operations. Of course, technology, with all the benefits that it represents in terms of how we organize work, how efficient we become, and how productive we become, also represents some challenges. If we constantly update our technology, that means that we need to learn continuously. Every time the technology is changed or updated or upgraded, organizational members need to learn how to use the new technology. And so this can create some stress and strain on employees who have to continuously learn and might struggle as they can't keep up with the continuous change. Another challenge with technology is the loss of personal contact. And that's something we already discussed when we discussed virtual teams. This is one of the challenges that technological or electronic communication cannot eliminate. When we work with people and our only interaction is remote, when our only communication is electronic, we are not able to exchange ideas as freely, to participate as much, and to build reciprocity and trust, which is at times extremely important within organizations and when organizations interact with external members like customers or suppliers. And so while technology can represent lots of advantages, it also has some challenges or represents some challenges for organizations.